Hi, my name is Michelle Hobner, and this is an ELL training that's being done in completion for the class EDU 580 through Georgetown College Master's Program. This is Mr. Justin Yearsing from Cooper High School. He teaches U.S. history, and so we're going to look specifically at one of his U.S. history lessons and talk about some basics of ELL standards and how we can modify that lesson to better fit the needs of one of his ELL students from India. So the first thing that we're going to look at is just the basic setup of the way that ELL works. So there's 5 standards for ELL students, which cover the different basic domains that we look at in the school day. So there's math, science, social studies, English, and then there's a 5th one, which is social language. So that one's added on there. The domains within those include reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And within those domains, there's also levels. So if you look here, these are the scores of the student that you had. So she had for listening a 4.1, for speaking a 4, for reading 2.8, and writing 3.3. This is out of a 6-point scale. So if they reach a 6, then they are graduated from the ELL program, and they're no longer required to be in there. So we see that the lowest for hers is reading. Within these sections, we have what's called can-do descriptors. All of this information you would be able to see in the PSP. And these can-do descriptors are going to tell you what the student is able to do to help them focus on the positive aspects rather than what they can't do to help them feel motivated and to move forward. So these descriptions down here, such as listening, we have distinguished between multiple meanings of oral words or phrases in social and academic contexts. So you can use that to help you formulate how complicated or how simple the work needs to be for the ELL student. So if we look over here at reading, which is the lowest one, we notice over here there's a lot more suggestions of things with graphic organizers, with photos, with things to help her really understand the reading in small pieces. Whereas with listening and speaking being the highest, there's a lot more words here like compare and contrast and to give longer descriptions because that's what she's capable of doing at the time. So if we're looking at different ELL methods, so one of the common myths that people have for ESL students is that you should not use any of their native language, when in reality that can be a very helpful tool if the student is really having a hard time. So especially in regards to her reading, given that that was the lowest, that would probably be the only aspect for her where you would maybe incorporate something that is in her native language. One of the suggestions that was made here in your lesson plan, and we'll talk about that in a minute, was that giving her maybe some lists of words regarding traditions for inaugurations or for electoral processes would be really good things for her to see in her native language because she's looking from a whole different governmental process. And so just having that cultural difference and the language difference is a good opportunity to incorporate her first language so that she's able to transfer those ideas over. Some other things that can be helpful to keep in mind is just teaching at grade level. Lots of times with ELL students, it's easy for us to want to teach them basic English rather than teaching them the grade level material, and then they move on and it snowballs and they're way far behind. Let's see here, the stages of learning a language. So first, they're going to learn to listen, then speaking, then writing, then reading, which is interesting because you see that exactly here in her scores, that her highest 2 are speaking and listening, and her lowest 2 are reading and writing, with the very lowest being reading. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when a student is learning, because lots of times as native English speakers, we hear somebody speaking or understanding conversation, and we're like, oh, they're good. They've got it. But then when they read or when they write, it appears as if they maybe don't understand. Many times this can be misdiagnosed as a learning disability, when really that's just the natural progression of language learning. The last thing that we would want to look at is appropriate investigation of a student's background. So again, talking about cultural differences. When you're looking at somebody from India, it'd be important to know, does she even know what inauguration means, or are there officials automatically put into office? Do they have elections? So is she understanding any of the process that's going on here, or is it completely new to her how a president would come into office. So if you want to, real quick, just kind of give us a basic overview of what your lesson was about, and then we'll talk about a few modifications that I made.
Sure. It was, it's basically a 2 to 3 part lesson where it would be a PowerPoint with some visuals, and then I would ask students to take notes on things that I would see as important for their test. And then I was going to hand out FDR's inauguration speech, and then potentially do a whole class discussion and wrap up what they read and how it applied to what he actually either did or would be doing during his presidency. And then if time allowed, we would do a video clip that kind of enhanced the lesson as best it could.
Okay. So in regards to a few modifications that we've added here, what I really tried to focus on was, because reading was the lowest and speaking and listening were the highest, is I asked myself, how can I use speaking and listening to really help her understand the reading better? So one of the things that I decided to do is either along with or instead of whole class discussion, breaking down into small groups to where she can feel comfortable speaking and listening and not feel nervous being in front of everybody, and that discussion can help her to understand the reading better as well. Also, I created an organizer for her that's going to help her look through the reading, because the reading was fairly long and had a lot of technical language in it, which sometimes even students who are native English speakers might have to look up, and so where she's also learning English, it can be twice as hard. So the organizer, if you look through it, I don't have a copy of it here with me, but it has different sections for her to pull keywords out of paragraphs and to look up just those words in a dictionary and use that to kind of say, all right, what do you think the meaning of this inaugural address could be, and what do you think his ideas could be? So the idea of the worksheet is to help her look for keywords rather than feeling overwhelmed by everything there together on one page. Also, we've done a modification to print off the PowerPoint for her so that as she's listening to you speak and give notes, she has a picture right there with it that she can later look back and associate to what you said, and that's going to help her recall the information as well. Okay, also see for ELL students, use of technology in the classroom can be something that is really beneficial to them. So if you could just give us a few examples of some of the ways that you have used technology in the classroom.
Sure. PowerPoints and the use of a projector and obviously the computer to project those on for the students to get notes instead of doing handwritten notes or whatnot. And then for this lesson, the use of visuals, pulling pictures offline to give kids another way to view the information instead of them just reading it or hearing me speak it.
Okay, great. Some other things that I've added, just to make it even more so, because you can't really overdo it too much, is just being able to have access to phones for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons that it can be good is so that the ELL student is able to look up words right away on an electronic dictionary. That can be really helpful, especially if you're talking about something and using the same word over and over again. She doesn't have to sit there flipping through and looking it up. So that's one way that the phones can be good. Also, just when they're having the discussions about the inaugural speech, something I added in here was for them to look up either little video clips or pictures of FDR giving the inaugural speech, because any kind of visual aid that you can give the student is helpful in them understanding, okay, here's what an inauguration looks like. And so I'm not just reading about it and I'm not just hearing a word, I actually get to see a picture of what's going on. And so having them do that in their small groups can be a good way to bring some more understanding to what's happening. Another way that you can incorporate technology into helping this specific ELL student is to have a listening or a recording of the speech that she can be hearing as she's reading, because sometimes they'll see a word and it might not make sense, especially in English, because there's so many letters that don't make sounds or sound different here and change for different words. So if she can hear it, that's usually very helpful to any understanding as well. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about advocacy for the student and something called the affective filter. The affective filter is when the student doesn't feel comfortable. Studies have shown that they usually do not absorb as much of the material. So if they feel nervous, if they feel like what they're saying isn't making sense, or it's not a comfortable place, they usually have much harder time understanding the English input when they're not in a comfortable environment. There's 4 dimensions of every student biography, which consist of linguistic, academic, cognitive, and sociocultural. The one that I want to focus on specifically is sociocultural. This one is one of the main pieces of the whole framework, and this is basically talking about their social life, their cultural life, and how all of that affects the academic school world. And so one of the things that lots of educators forget is that it can help a ELL student to feel much more comfortable in the classroom, to lower that affective filter if they have any opportunity at all to share about their native culture. So this could be a great lesson where there's good opportunities for the student to maybe show a few pictures of what it looks like when somebody's put into office in India compared to the States. Or maybe there's an event in India similar to the Great Depression, which she could relate to the students. So not only does that help the students understand a different culture, but it helps the ELL student to feel more comfortable in expressing herself and understanding things as well. So do you have any questions for me about anything that we've talked about?
No, I think this was very helpful, and, to make modifications to the lesson, especially with a student who's ESL, would be beneficial to take a lot of the tips and ideas that you have and apply those to future lessons. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me.
For sure.